Hey guys, this is Abhay Talreja, and in this lecture we are going to see a little more on how let and constant got over variables. Yes, this is ECMAScript 6 and welcome to the lecture. Traditionally, the way declarations work has been one tricky part of programming in JavaScript. In most C-based languages like variables or bindings are created on the spot where the declaration occurs. In JavaScript, however, this is not the case. Where your variables are actually created depends on how you declare them. And ECMAScript 6 offers options to make controlling scope easier. In this lecture, what we will see is why classic variable declarations can be confusing, introduce you to block level bindings in ECMAScript 6, and then of course we'll discuss some best practices around it. So let's get started and understand variable and hosting before even we move on to let and constant. Variable declarations using var are treated as if are at the top of the function or global scope if it is declared of course outside the function, regardless of where the actual declarations happen, and that's called hosting. If you're not familiar with the subject, let's see an example and let's try to figure that out. So let's say we have a function get value, and that function has a condition variable, and if condition is true, we just declare a value. Variable value is equals to, let's say, black. And you can have all the other code if you want to, but this should be good enough for our example. Variable value, and then you say else return null. Now you would expect that this works correctly, but you totally forgot that value variable actually even exists here, and that value would be of course undefined, and you cannot also expect that value will be existing here. Now if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript, then you might expect the variable value to be only created if the condition evaluates to true. In fact, the variable value is created regardless. Now behind the scenes, the engine pretty much works like this. So what it does is, it goes here, it creates a variable value, that's the declaration part of it, and then it just assigns the value of black to it. So value object or value variable is actually accessible to you in all the loops. Of course the value is not defined here, but it is defined only here, and that was something called as hosting in JavaScript. So the declaration of value is hosted at the top while the initialization remains in the same spot. And it often takes new JavaScript developers some time to get used to declaration hosting, and misunderstanding this technique behavior can end up causing bugs. And for this reason, ECMAScript 6 introduces block level scoping option to make controlling a variable's lifecycle a little more powerful. Now what is block level declaration? Well, the block level declaration is nothing but when you have anything within a function, that's a block level, or you have any code in a block which is in curly braces like this, and of course function also has curly braces, so that's counted as a block level declaration. Now let's see the let declarations and how they work, how they are different from variable. So let me just write the separator as let, and let's get started. So the let declaration syntax, the way you do it is let. It is like a 3-letter again, just like a variable, and you can basically replace variable with a let to declare a variable, but limit the variable scope to only the current block. So when you declare a let variable, it will declare the variable just like a var, but it will limit the scope. In this case, you saw the scope was outside the if condition too, but if you declare a let value here, the value will only remain for this function. So let me copy this function, let me just write another one, get value 2. In this scenario, instead of doing a var here, nothing needs to be done here. Let's move this to let value black. In this scenario, what would happen is the value itself doesn't exist. And same for here, because let declarations are not hoisted at the top of the enclosing block, so you just have the let will be declared here and it will not be moved outside the block. Let's move on to the next part, and what we are going to cover here is, it's called redeclaration. I'm sure if you have coded in JavaScript, you would have come across this, where you do a variable count is equals to 20, and let's say at 30 lines below, if you start doing variable count is equals to 30, it will completely work, and it will also be able to put the value of count onto the console. Let's go and see that. Let's run with JS, and you can see the 30 works. So even if you redeclare, it works with variable. But what if you change this to a let? In this case, it will give you an error saying count has been declared already, which means redeclaration can be avoided. And this was one of the problems in JavaScript. Now what if the let variable was created in a function? Let's say function, my function, and we just go here and do this, and let's move this let inside the function. Let's also do a console log of what we see on the screen. Let's also call my function, so my function gets called. Let's clear this, let's run this, and you can see both of them got printed and both were created with a different value. And this let, or the same count variable, is not available outside the function block because it's bounded by the block. Now let's see something else. Let's see the constant declarations. So let me just close the output. Let's just go to constant declarations. Let's add the separator so we know we are seeing the constants. You can also define variables in ECMAScript 6 with the constant declaration syntax. Variables declared using constants are considered constants, meaning their values cannot be changed once set. For this reason, every constant variable must have initialization on declaration. So let's say if you do a constant, and then let's say max items is equals to 30, and if you do just constant name, the constant name will give you an error. Let's run, and you can see missing initializer in constant declaration, which was the name. Let me comment this, and everything should work again. And things work, right? So constants always need to have their initialization when they are declared, because their values cannot change later. So what's the difference between constant and let? Well, constants like let declarations are block level declarations. That means constants are no longer accessible once the execution flow out of the block in which they are declared, and declarations are not hoisted, as you can see in the next example. So if you do a condition, just like we had that condition up there, and you do, let's just move this here, okay, and if you do a constant of max items is equals to 10, and you can have more code here. So of course max items will not be accessible here. And the condition variable is not here, so you can just put it into a new function. Value 3, and let's move this into, okay. Now if you try to access max items here, so console dot log max items, let's call the function which is get value 3, and that's it too. Let's run this and see, everything runs. Okay, so the problem is I have max items outside as well as inside, so let's just call it as max items 2, and let's try to run it again, and now you should see error saying that it's not defined outside the if condition. So just like variables, we cannot reinitialize them to let, we can also have the same problems with constants. So let's say I have a variable message is equals to hello, and I have a let age is equals to 25. In this case, if I try to do a constant, let me just comment this max items, otherwise it will not let us proceed. Let's say constant message is equals to goodbye, and constant age is equals to 30 instead of 25. Let's try to run this. We'll get an exception saying that message has already been declared. Let's comment this out to see if age also gives you the same error. And you should see age also has been declared. So this will not let you proceed if you already have those declarations done. Despite those similarities, there is one big difference between let and constant to remember. Attempting to assign a constant to a previously defined constant will throw an error. So let me show you an example. So const x is equals to 20, and now when you try to do an x is equals to 10, this will give you an error because x is already been declared, assignment to a constant variable. You can see that. Let's just comment this out, otherwise it will not let us proceed. Let's see how we declare objects with constant. Well, you may expect something, but the behavior is actually completely different. So let's see that. A constant declaration prevents the modification of binding and not the value itself. So let me put that into practice. That means the constant declaration of the objects do not prevent modification of those objects. Let's see this. So constant person, a very common example, where we have a person, we have a name, and let's say the name is Abhay. Okay. Now, if you have a constant person, okay, let's just remove this E. Let's move on. Let's do a person dot name is equals to John. So what do you expect here? Will this be allowed or won't this be allowed? Well, let's see the answer. The answer is that it will be allowed because you can update the contents of the object, but the object itself is a constant. So let's say if you try to do something like this, person is equals to name is, let's say, Jim. Let's try to run this and you will see an error because you are assigning a constant. So what do we see here? The binding person is created with an initial value of an object with one property, which is name. It's possible to change person.name without causing an error because the changes what person contains and doesn't change the value of the person is bound to. When this code attempts to assign a value to person, an error will be thrown. Just remember, constant modifications on the bindings and not the modifications on bound value. I'll see you in the next class.